to our session. I'm Vikram Gadre from the Department of Electrical Engineering, IIT Bombay. And I have my young friend Sagar Sangotkar with me. Sagar has just graduated with an MTech degree from our department, and he has worked with me for nearly 3 years now on his master's dissertation. And in addition, he has been active in our R&D group in many ways. So today we are going to actually share with you a part of the work that Sagar did for his master's dissertation, and where we believe there are many possibilities to take it further. And that's why we are sharing this with you in this workshop, and we would be very happy to have some of you participate to take some of this work further. I will now begin to share my screen, where I will show the presentation and then go ahead from there. Yes. So is my screen visible, Sagar?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. So we are going to talk today about the theme multi-resolution and deep learning techniques for biometric ear recognition. So in fact, let me say a few words before we start the whole presentation. First and foremost, this is a biometric theme. That means we are looking for techniques that relate to identifying humans, characterizing humans, all right? And secondly, this is kind of out of the run, not run of the mill. It's not very, this is not a very common biometric. Now I'll go into the details. We'll, proceed with the details. So this is how I'm going to organize the presentation, and Sagar is going to, in fact, this presentation has been prepared by Sagar with my guidance. And in fact, this is based on work done by him for his master's dissertation. So we are going to organize a presentation like this. We are going to first introduce the idea of biometrics. We are going to go on to ear recognition and talk about multi-resolution techniques for feature extraction with a demonstration. Then proceed again to deep learning techniques for feature extraction with a demonstration. And then of course, we would give some details to enable you to take the work further. So a few words about what biometrics are. What are biometrics really? Biometrics is a subject. It's an area of research work where you study automated methods for uniquely recognizing humans or characterizing humans based upon one or more intrinsic physical or behavioral traits or modalities. Now, here there are two kinds. There are physical traits and there are behavioral traits or modalities. So what kind of physical and behavioral traits or modalities? The physiological or physical traits, we have the fingerprint, which is probably the best known, the iris, the ear, the face, the palm print, the voice, finger knuckles, and several others. In the behavioral measurements or in the behavioral modalities, we have keystrokes, the way a person carries out keystrokes, finger pressure, swipe speed, touch patterns or gait, the way the person walks, and there are several others. We are not going into behavioral methods here today. We are only talking about physiological methods. So let's be clear about our coordinates. Even among those physiological methods, we are focusing our attention on the ear, which is less known. You see, the fingerprint is well known. Everybody, in fact, there are, even in many of these detective stories, you tend to hear about the fingerprints at the scene of crime or the fingerprints at the scene of action and so on. So fingerprints are very well known. Iris, essentially related to the eye, is not so well known, but now with the Aadhaar, Aadhaar kind of unique identification, the iris also has started to get better known. The ear is probably very little known as a biometric, but actually it's a very powerful biometric. We'll share the details with you as we go along. So when you talk about a biometric system, what are the components? In general, whether it is physiological or behavioral, there's going to be an input biometric, there's going to be a sensor. And from the sensor, we extract certain features, whatever is recorded by the sensor. So for example, if you're recording the image of the ear, then you would extract certain features from it. And then you would have two parallel paths. In one path, the features are given to a matcher, and the other path, the features are given to a database from which certain processing is done and then also given to the matcher. Could be, trying to retrieve a similar one or something like that. And the matcher then takes these two inputs and takes a decision on the biometric being presented. So, you see, when we operate a biometric system, it can be in two different modes. It can either be in an identification mode or it can be in a verification mode. In an identification mode, we are essentially trying to see who it is who has this biometric. So what are we doing in an identification mode? You have sensed it, as you can see. I'll show you with my cursor. Are you able to see my cursor? Sagar, is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
yes, sir. You can see.
Yeah, it's visible, right? Good. So now I'm showing you the sensor followed by a feature extractor. All right. And then you see the feature extractor has to do a lot of computation, typically based on the sensed image or sensed file or whatever it is. And then you extract certain features which typically are of some kind of numerical form. They have to be in some numerical form. Otherwise, it's very difficult to compare features, isn't it? So these would be in some kind of form which can be processed mathematically. And then now you have two inputs. This is a matcher going on here. You're getting inputs from the feature extractor. You have inputs from the database. The matcher takes a decision either to verify, identify, or to reject. This is an identification mode. So here, for example, suppose you're talking about finger. Now this could be anything. It could be fingerprints, it could be ear, it could be iris. So you just put in those things into the right place. So here it could be a sensor for the fingerprint, it could be a sensor for the iris, it could be a sensor for the ear or whatever it is. And then all the other processes is essentially the same. This is a high level description of a biometric system. Now coming to the verification mode. In the verification mode, again, you have a sensor. You have done the feature extraction. In fact, as you can see, by and large, the components are the same. It's not that you have a different system, but the mode of operation of the system is different. So here the decision is whether there is a genuine or imposter. So, you're saying, so in an identification or verification, the difference is, well, in an identification system, suppose now Vikram Gadre is putting up a fingerprint. The matcher takes Vikram Gadre's fingerprint, looks at its database and says, oh, this is Vikram Gadre. In the verification, I claim to be Vikram Gadre and the matcher says, yes, you are Vikram Gadre or you're not Vikram Gadre. Even though it's quite possible that it might match closely to some extent with some other fingerprint, that is the difference. In the database, it doesn't allow you to log in as Vikram Gadre or it doesn't allow you to pose as Vikram Gadre. That's the difference. So it becomes an imposter. Or if your fingerprint matches or if your ear matches and it says, yes, indeed, your biometric matches with that of Vikram Gadre. So that is the difference between identification and verification. Now again, in identification and verification, there are different performance metrics. That means, you have to evaluate. See, ultimately, when we are designing a biometric system, we need to evaluate the system. We need to look at what kind of quality the system has, how well it performs. So in identification mode, we use different kinds of rank accuracy. See, rank accuracy means, at what rank would you accept either, identity or reject, right? So is it at rank 1? That means it must really match the best. Or is it at rank 5? That means, within the first 5. Or does it use certain cumulative match characteristics? Or does it, so all these things, these are the different ways in which you can evaluate an identification mode biometric system. What is its rank 1 accuracy? That means how frequently does it give you as the best match? Rank 5 accuracy. How frequently does it give you within the first 5 best? The correct answer. Then there are cumulative match characteristic, which is requires a little more description. And similarly, area under curve, so these are, so, there's, the receiver operating characteristics and you use the area under the curve. And ideally it should go towards 100% or 1, but then it as much as possible is better. So in the verification mode, again, Some things are common, like you could also have the area under curve, and you could use the receive operating characteristics. You could use the false acceptance rate and the genuine acceptance rate. The more the genuine acceptance rate, the better. The false acceptance rate, the lower the false acceptance rate, the better. Again, there is an area under curve concept there, and there's an equal error rate. This is something peculiar to the verification mode. So this has to do with two densities, which correspond to the possibilities. And so anyway, again, I can't go into all the mathematical details here, but suffice it to say that these relate to density functions, which are associated with the identification process. Now we'll come to the main theme of our talk, that is ear recognition. You see, fingerprints, as I said, are well understood, and we don't want to go into fingerprints today. We instead want to see this rather unusual biometric that we are talking about here today. When we look at the ear of a person, it has certain peculiar features. These are common. These features are common to all, typically almost all ears. But, their specific details, the details of these features are peculiar to a person. This is something which is not very well known. For example, the helix, the fossata, the inferior curves, and there are so many others. There are actually many of these are medical terms, but all these really refer to different parts of the ear texture. If you look at it, when you look at an ear in 3 dimensions, you would see all this in 3 dimensions. But here we are talking about an image of a ear which would show you all these important characteristics. And these characteristics are peculiar to individuals. That is what we are exploiting in this biometric. And as far as the properties of this biometric or the advantages of this biometric are concerned, it's a very stable biometric trait because, the ear doesn't change too much in a person's lifetime. It has a unique shape, it has a unique structure and an appearance that differs for every person. And the ear image acquisition process is contactless and non-intrusive. That is very important because even for fingerprints, typically at least, the touch-based fingerprints, we need to touch. And in fact, in a way, the ear recognition system is very important today in these days of the pandemic. Because if you wish to build a biometric system which avoids touch, then the ear is certainly a very attractive option. So how would you do it? I mean, you can't just focus on a ear. What you really need to do is to capture a relevant part of a person's profile, maybe the face, or maybe even a little more focused than the face. You need to detect the ear, and then you need to extract features from the ear, and then you need to do a matching and a decision. This is a typical ear recognition pipeline. Now let's come to some important milestones of ear recognition technologies. You see, if you look at it, ear recognition technology is not new in that sense. It's not as if it came about 5 or 6 years ago. Although a lot of serious development has taken place over the last 15, 20 years, you could say. People recognized that the ear was an attractive biometric all the way around 1900. That's pretty more than a century ago. And people actually tried to use the ear in forensics, maybe even 30 to 40 years after that. And there was almost, maybe about 80 years ago or, around that time, there was a first large scale study. So it's not as if it's a totally new kind of approach. It was also used for the identification of newborns around 1960. And a large scale study was published in 1989. That's probably much more recent. And then several other techniques were used. See, I mean, now these techniques for image processing for feature extraction are probably more recent. Around 1996, you could see that they used the Voronoi distance graphs and they used automated ear recognition, geometric features, force fields. So a lot of techniques started coming into the picture. Once this started catching up with image processing techniques with the computational power that our computers could allow. And now as we move towards the current age from 2005 and 2007, you could see that we also use certain very powerful multi-resolution methods, which we are also going to talk about today, like wavelets or log-Gabor methods, non-negative matrix factorization, which is a generic technique. It is not just for multi-resolution, but then wavelets and log-Gabor are actually multi-resolution approaches. And then there were several others. I mean, in fact, Sagar is going to tell you more about it. So I don't want to take away the thunder from Sagar, as they say. So, now again, when we do a high-level comparison here of different, there have been different ear recognition challenges. So it's not as if people are just sitting and trying to do research in an isolated environment. There are actually challenges saying, well, we are giving you so many images. You could try your algorithm on those images and tell us how well your algorithm does, and we'll tell you how you compare with other algorithms in the world. So therefore, we have several different approaches which have been proposed, and you can see here the performance of these algorithms for different challenges. In fact, what I'll do is I'll invite Sagar here to speak for a couple of minutes about these challenges. I'll go on, continue with my presentation, but I think it's a good point for Sagar to interject here and say a little more, because Sagar has been following up on some of these challenges, so he can tell us a little more. So Sagar, over to you. Why don't you say a little bit about these challenges?
Yeah, sure. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
You can turn your video on. I suggest turn your video on.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Sagar. So briefly speaking about this slide. Various participants were allowed to submit their approaches, and at the end, the organizers did the evaluation using a test data set. And these numbers which we see are the accuracies on that test set. R1 means it is rank 1 accuracy, and R5 means rank 5, which in the previous slide, which was explained briefly. And yeah, so we can see that this is an unconstrained data set, and this local binary pattern, if we see, is handcrafted based features, and all the others are a fusion of deep learning based approaches and handcrafted features. So we can see fusion of CNN and HOG. So this shows us that the deep learning based approaches have an added advantage when the data set is a bit unconstrained. So yeah, that we can see. And yeah, I think that's all for this slide. We can continue.
Good, good, yeah. So again, there are several data sets that one can use. And here we are just listing a few of the data sets. We talk about AWE and UERC. And also, by the way, we've also prepared a data set at IIT Bombay. That's the IITB data set that you see. And there are several others, by name, which have been listed here. So what it really tells you is that ear recognition is not in its infancy. It's actually pretty evolved, and there are several people who have created data sets to, enable ear recognition studies. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about multi-resolution techniques. You see, when we talk about a representation of an image, what is it that we want out of that representation? We would like that representation to be rigid to invariant to rigid transformations. So even if you translate, or if you scale, or you rotate, the representation should not be affected, or not be significantly affected. It should be, within a certain range of effect. It should preferably also be invariant to non-rigid deformations. So, now here there's a technicality. What we are saying is that if phi, phi, the transformation must be Lipschitz continuous to deformations. That means there exists a constant such that for all tau and x, if you deform x according to the parameter tau, then it remains to, of course, scale by the norm of x within a certain upper bound based only on the extent of deformation. So, when you look at this expression here, C is a constant. This says that, of course, the deformation will depend on the norm of X. So if an image norm is higher, the deformation will be higher. But, in proportion to the image norm, the deformation will only depend on a constant and a supremum based on the actual extent of deformation. There's an upper limit on this. Yeah. So it preserves signal energy and it retains higher order information. Now, higher order information would be the kind of information that is critical in taking a decision on the image. So, for example, in a facial image, what could be the higher order information? Maybe certain features of the eyes, certain features of the nose. So that higher order information must be preserved, even if certain pixel values are changed. The higher order information must be preserved. The same must be true if I'm dealing with the ear image here. So what we are saying, now let's look at, the details. Now here you see here, I am going a little bit into the math because I'm assuming that many of you would actually want to know more about the technical details, and we'll say a little bit about the math here. So let an image be translated by a translation parameter. So here we are talking about an image which belongs to a two-dimensional space, obviously R2. And therefore you translate it by the translation C1, C2. It's essentially, two parameters of translation, one in the X and Y directions. And you could have various kinds of translation invariants. Suppose you want it to be invariant to translation, then the Fourier transform modulus is invariant to translation. The autocorrelation is invariant to translation, and certain registration algorithms could, of course, be invariant to translation, right? So if you design your registration algorithm properly, you could make it invariant to translation. But then there is a problem. You see, when it's the Fourier transform is not stable to deformation. If you use the Fourier transform, it's not going to be stable to some kind of a deformation in the image. It could be a non-linear deformation or a scaling. These things are severely affected. The image features are severely affected. High frequencies particularly are severely distorted even by small deformations. Now again, this is a bit technical, but this explains what happens for higher frequencies. So let's take a small dilation, right? That means tau of u is epsilon times u. Epsilon is a constant between 0 and 1. So what you're saying essentially is a scaling on the whole image by a factor of epsilon. Now, since delta tau u is epsilon, you see what we are saying when we talk about Lipschitz continuity, the condition essentially says that the difference between the original image Fourier transform and the transformed Fourier transform should be some multiple of, should be upper bounded by a limit, right? And that limit is a constant multiplied by the norm of the image, norm of X times the deformation parameter epsilon. Anyway, going on from here, I'm not going into all the working. Let's take xt being a sum of certain partials. Partials meaning, some components. And here, what is going to happen when if you take a dilation, what is going to happen? Each partial is going to be translated. The frequency, in the frequency domain, you see a translation by a factor of n omega naught times epsilon. And what can happen is that at higher frequencies, this n epsilon times omega naught could very well become larger than the bandwidth of the original image. So if that is the case, then it would cause a severe distortion of the image. Yes. So that means harmonics of the transformed image would not overlap with the original harmonics. And that would be a severe problem. So naturally, the norm of the difference between the original image and the transformed image in the Fourier domain does not decrease proportionally to epsilon. So that condition is violated if the amplitudes are significantly large at higher frequencies. That means the higher frequencies are going to pose a severe problem here. And higher frequencies do concern us, because higher frequencies might very well actually carry higher order information too. And so we cannot ignore them. So Lipschitz continuity is not satisfied for any constant. That means that condition which we desired, it's not satisfied. So we cannot use that condition at all. Now, in fact, this is, this illustrates that frequency instability problem a little better. So you had the original, frequency of 100 hertz, and so so it shows essentially the frequencies before and after dilation. As you can see, the lower frequencies are less affected. The 100 hertz frequency is affected. In fact, the effect on the frequencies in some sense proportional to the frequency. So you see what happens to the 100 hertz frequency. You see a little more happens to the 200 hertz frequency, much more happens to the 400 hertz frequency, and the 800 hertz frequency is much worse affected. So the higher the frequency, the worse the effect on that frequency. So what is one solution to that? One solution to that could be to move into wavelet domain. So from Fourier to wavelets, as we are saying. What is a wavelet? A wavelet is a small wave. So replace sinusoidal waves by localized functions having a Fourier support that is wider at higher frequencies. So you essentially change the bandwidth proportional to the center frequency. That's what wavelet transforms do. And the technicalities are that suppose you have a mother wavelet. When you dilate the wavelet like this, of course, the wavelet transform would then be defined by, essentially correlating